you can just get rid of your video. Okay, cool. So we are recording. I am Cliff White from Strong Machine Adventure Racing. We are a little short on teammates tonight, since most of them are either in Virginia or on their way back. I want to congratulate everyone who participated in the Shenandoah Epic this weekend. From what I heard from Kate and the team, it was exceptionally brutal course this year with very physical, demanding route, and I think only 2 teams cleared the course. So that's a sign of that's my kind of course. I like everyone to be thinking, are we going to clear this? So yeah, 24 hours of fun in Virginia, and definitely more green on the trees there, but we are quickly getting into adventure racing season here. So hope everyone's getting excited. And I don't have much else to add other than Maine Summer Adventure Race is really shaping up to be a good one this year. And we're also working on Wildlands as a 2-day stage race. That's looking like it's going to come together. So we have not opened registration for that yet. We're going to make sure we get all the permits before we promise you 2 days of racing, but there'll definitely be 1 day of racing there. But yeah, other than that, we have Rick Keilty, who's going to be leading this session. We had Tom, who's down in Virginia right now, and was helping navigate there, kind of do the Nav 101, which is on YouTube if you guys want to check it out. Rick is going to bring that to the next level and kind of go more into adventure racing tips. And I will not say anything more specific because I don't really know what you're going to be presenting on, but I'm pretty excited to hear it. And yeah, if you need me, I'm here. Otherwise, I will give you presenter rights and it's all yours.
You've heard variations on this exact talk before, Cliff. So there's nothing here that's going to surprise you. I promise I won't go too. I'm much less fancy than Tom last time. I don't have a slide deck or anything. I'm mostly just going to chat about some of my tips and tricks over the years. We had a really long nav session last time, about an hour, really covering lots of great basics. And some intermediate level stuff. I won't be focusing as much on the how to navigate and what are the basics that you need to navigate. It's more of what are the main tips that I've picked up over the years, more specific to adventure racing and orienteering. And I'll deviate from that. It probably won't be as long as Tom's. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. I'm eyeing this on the side here, so I can talk pretty well for as long as people have questions tonight.
And I am all about color commentary, so I'll be jumping in too. Tell all the dirty stories.
Love it. Yeah, so a little just the background on me. I've been racing with Strong Machine for a few years now. I've been doing adventure racing for a little over a decade. I do a lot of orienteering. I race at the New England Orienteering Club around Boston. I'm East Coast based. Navigation has always been my jam. It's always been the thing that I enjoy the most. It's what draws me back to adventure racing. I've won a bunch of solo races around the East Coast. I've won a bunch of Mark Latanzi's 24-hour navigation races and Rogaines. So I have a pretty good sense of what it takes to navigate in the woods, both with a team and by yourself. And I've been all over the world with Cliff and Kate before, so lots of different navigation situations that we've been in. But I guess I'll get started with the tools of navigating, and I'll just get started with the thing that I wish when I first started adventure racing, someone had told me, buy this tool day one. That's not like a compass type thing, is an altimeter. And this came up at the end of our last nav chat. If you can get an altimeter, just like a simple basic barometric pressure thing from REI, you can get them pretty cheap. It is, outside of your base gear, the most important navigation tool, in my opinion, that you'll have in your tool chest, because you're no longer navigating on a map just on a 2-dimensional plane. Now you're navigating with height in mind. And this is super important because it all of a sudden gives you another waypoint when you're going along a trail that might be going up a mountain, and there may not be any significant, visuals to tell you where you might be, but you can always do a quick, like, I'm at 2,000 feet. I know exactly where I am on the map now. This is huge. I didn't get an altimeter until like 3 or 4 years into racing, and it was a game changer when I did. Highly recommend picking up an altimeter if you can. Tom touched base about compasses a lot in the last one. This is like get a compass that works for you. Simple as that. Play around with a couple of them if you have the opportunity to. I know that there's not orienteering clubs everywhere, but if you have access to a local orienteering club, they will have all the different types of compasses that you can possibly find. And they are, you can mess around with them and play with them. Some people like the wrist ones, some people like the thumb ones. Get what works for you, and go from there. My personal preference is one that I can declinate. I like to go by the strategy of whatever decisions I can take away from my brain by using tools or before a race, I will take advantage of it. So pre-declinating a compass is huge for me. Other tools, just because the first subject that I have on here is tools. Tom talked about, waterproof back bag holders are huge. On a bike, if you can find a rotatable map holder, you'll see them in a lot of races. Fantastic. The first few races, again, that I had, I used to have a map that was slung over my neck. When you're riding a bike, that becomes a giant pain in the ass, because now you have one hand that you're flipping up, trying to read the map, trying to steer with another hand. And I've crashed more than once doing that, and then realized they made these map holders that were fantastic. And I wish I had picked one of those up sooner, but I didn't. The other thing that I carry to every race, markers and pen to mark the maps like crazy. Every time I get a map before I start a race, I will go through it pre-race with my teammates looking on, with different colored highlighters, essentially highlighting what I think are the best routes, potential bailout routes, and then quickly writing in with a pen what the distances look like. Again, this goes to the, like, I no longer have to think about this during a race now because I've done it in advance. I'd rather take an extra 10 to 15 minutes when everybody has left the starting line to make sure my map is marked, and then not have to think about it again for the rest of the day, than to get out quickly and be a little bit scatterbrained when I'm on the course. It's a super useful time investment, in my opinion. On the longer races, one of the things that I like to use as well is it's called a scale master. It's a tool that you literally, like, you draw on the map and it tells you how far you've drawn once you punch in the map scale. And this is really useful if you're doing like a multi-day expedition race, and you might be going, dozens to hundreds of miles before you pop off of a discipline. It's really useful, again, to quickly kind of do like, okay, we're going to go 20 miles here and then 4 miles here. Again, goes back to I don't want to think about it during a race. If I can pre-mark it and pre-write it down, it's huge. And then the last thing I have for tools, just cyclometer on the bike. Again, really useful. They're allowed in all the races. Everybody will have them. Being able to tell distance when you're on a bike is incredibly important. It's just like having an altimeter when you're on foot. It's just that extra piece of information that can tell you where you are when you're out navigating. So it's huge. Any questions on tools before I jump on? Those are kind of the biggies that I have in my mind, but anybody have any other tools that they use that they love, or questions on what I talked about here? Sweet. I'll move on. I'll actually preempt Cliff here and say that Cliff was really impressed in Spain. Thanks, Cliff. We raced a few years ago, and if you get a bike map holder that sits in your handlebars, it takes a little bit of getting used to when you're riding, because it like bounces around like crazy, and it can be a little bit tricky to kind of read it while you're trying to nav and while you're trying to bike. And so it's worth practicing quite a bit with it before you actually take it out into a race. I wouldn't buy one, go into a race, be like, this is going to be a game changer. It definitely takes a few rides to get accustomed to it. Boat tools. Cliff knows my stance on water. I don't have a lot of navigation tools specific for boating, other than a waterproof map bag folder. Is there anything that pops into your mind, Cliff, that you use specifically navigation wise?
The one thing I keep wanting to pick up and haven't yet is a deck compass that you can clip onto, especially if you're in a closed cockpit kayak, to just so you're not having to stop paddling to look at your wrist compass. And there's some you can buy that have like clippy like bungees on it. You can make your own. I know there's a photo from C2C of Shane Hagerman and Peter Yawley's team. And Peter, I think, created like custom built his own. So like you might want to scroll through those photos and check those out if you're into building that. I don't think we've ever used one of those though. I think just in terms of tips for navigating in water, it's like a completely different discipline almost. Like, I don't know what your experience with it is, Rick. You said, I know your feelings on it. I know you're generally like, let Kate take the naps on the water, because Kate and I have navigated a lot on the water together in Maine, where there's islands and rivers and all sorts of weird, cool water features to figure out. And Kate is pretty good at it. But maybe you can expound on that and what your experience has been navigating on the water.
Yeah, so I can talk about, like I said, I don't have any tools, but I have tips for sure that I use when I'm on the water. You move slower than you think on the water, and generally when you're so there's a lot of different I'm just triangulating on ocean legs. Interesting. I'll come to the second question after I talk about some other water tips here. So water is either going to be on open water or you're going to be on rivers of some sort. Rivers, you're going to be just winding left and right. And the thing that throws most people when they're on rivers is that they tend to overcount how far they've gone on bends, because you forget as you're kind of chugging along, like, oh, this left and this right. And a winding river over 6 hours, your brain starts to go numb to counting. Because I always carry markers on me, what I frequently do is I'll mark my wrist with how many bends I've seen relative to what I'm looking at on the map. So I don't have to think about, I don't have to remember as much what I'm going through. That's fairly useful. I used to just mark like directly in my map bag. Like, I have gone through this, but when you draw that permanent marker, it wrecks the map bag, of course. But that's the main thing to look out for when you're on river bends, is just to make sure that you can count it somewhere other than your brain. And also the bridges are the best thing to look at when you're river navigating. There's always bridges, I'll say every 30 to 60 minutes or so on most of the races that I've done. And leveraging those as some sort of backstop or indicators to where you are is even better than using, using the bends themselves.
Time is the other one. Like watching your watch, that'll give you a really good feel for how fast the current is moving, because it's really hard to tell sometimes. So looking 5, 10, 15-minute intervals, even setting your alarm to go off that time and then that'll give you a sense of how fast you're traveling, and you can multiply off that too. That's another way to do it.
Yep. Open water is the other one you're going to encounter, either like giant lakes or, you might be on the ocean of some sort. This goes to the question number 2 here, which is, common to triangulate on ocean legs. The answer to that is yes. I'm not necessarily drawing on my map where I think we are, but usually when you're on a large open body of water, you're not going far enough away from shore in an AR where you can't see some sort of key indicator on shore that you're going to be encountering, either a riverbed that you're coming to, or some river entering the open body of water that you're in, or leaving if it's a lake. I'm always keeping in the back of my mind, like, what is something on shore that I'm trying to pay attention to, again, so I know where I'm going. And Cliff brought up too, like, time is super important here. The hardest nav I've ever had to do on water was actually a night nav across it was called Moosehead Lake in Maine, in the middle of the night during a thunderstorm, where you literally couldn't see the shore, and it was really hard to see the sky. And the main way that we navigated through this was we got a little bit lucky. Stars are your key here, believe it or not. Like, pick a point in the sky that you can kind of keep advantage of, and that you have a compass bearing at, and just paddle towards that. In the absence of being able to see the sky, it's just taking a bearing on your compass and trying to keep it as best you possibly can as your teammates are paddling. And it's annoying because you're looking at your compass while you're trying to paddle the whole time, but that's really the best you can do when you're in kind of a blind scenario.
I'm surprised at you mentioning Moosehead Lake, because do you remember nationals?
I was gonna say nationals is the second hardest that I've ever had to do, and and you can talk about that, Cliff. That was a great nav, right?
It was amazing. So nationals, this was in Indiana a couple of years ago, and it started at before dawn. And when we got in the water at dark, and as the sun came out, it was pea soup fog, and we were navigating on a lake that wasn't accurate on the map entirely because it was a dammed lake. It was like a man-made lake, and I have no idea how you did it, but I remember you being very exact about your directionals and taking a lot of time not paddling, just looking at your watch or your compass. And I think we saw land like twice on a 2-hour, 3-hour paddle. And then we got in to shore, and the guys waiting at the TA like, wow, nice job. And we were in like 4th place. We're like,
yeah.
How did you, I mean, you can explain how you did it, but I was just amazed at how I thought you were being too slow. I was like, let's paddle, Rick. This is the beginning of nationals. And we still managed to, do really.
Yeah. So in that situation, it was just time and direction on the compass. And it was just making sure that we kept our bearing to a T, going along the map. And that was super important when you can't see. Again, you're likely not going to run into a ton of AR situations where that's the case. But just sticking to your compass as best you can and sticking to your watch time when you literally can't see is the best that you can do. Because to the last comment in here, it's really easy on a paddle to over or undershoot, because the distances can vary wildly and your time can vary wildly because currents are really hard to track. So it's super tricky. The other like, I'd say it's a micro nav technique when you're on water in rivers is to pay attention to how to read water so that you don't constantly get beached when you're on some sort of a paddle leg. This is something that you will hear newer teams like talk about a lot when they come off of water legs. Like, man, I had to like drag my canoe through 3 dozen different sandbars that I ran into. And they'll talk to the more experienced teams. They're like, well, we paddled around it because if you can read the water correctly, the way that it ripples over certain features, this is something that's super good to pick up because it will save you a ton of time as opposed to getting stuck and having to drag. So learn how to read currents on rivers is super important. Not only sandbars you can get stuck on, but underwater logs, et cetera, it can get nasty. So time for using navigation. So this is a good transition. Let me I'll jump in away from water into what I view as like the four T's that I focus on when I'm racing. So this is part of a talk that I've given to like scouts and stuff before. It's kind of what I've boiled down my strategy to. So there's 4 T's that I think about when I get on a course. One is time, and time is just knowing how fast that I move in any given discipline and how that might change as the race goes on. And I'll come back to each of these and talk more in detail. 2 is tempo, which is knowing my pace and how that's going to vary in different terrain. Time and tempo go neck and neck, really. Targets, always have a target that you're aiming for. Even if your target is a blind bearing off of your compass, like lock it in and stick to it. Don't vary, like always have a target in mind. Don't be like, oh, we should hit this thing. No, like know that you're going to hit this thing. Know that there's a backstop. And the final T is talk. Always communicate to your teammates like loudly about time expectations, what you're looking for, what we shouldn't see, what we should see. That's super important. So if we go back to time, talking about time during navigation. So I have time is really important because Tom talked about pace counting and how that was really important to him, and Glenn talked about this. I have a really hard time pace counting, though it's a more accurate technique to getting how far you might be going. I use time to figure out how far I've gone during a race instead, because I can rely on my watch to tell me how much time has passed. again, this goes to my, like, I don't want to think about too much while I'm navigating. And so I know that on flat ground with a full pack at a reasonable pace of the team, I can, go roughly, 1 mile every 16 to 18 minutes on foot. And I'll vary that based on, are we going uphill? Are we going downhill? Is it muddy and gross? Are we bushwhacking? And you start to understand as you race more and more how these variables impact that time, so that you can start to make, you can look at your map and you can start to make pretty quick decisions like, we're going to go along this trail and okay, it's a half a mile. Okay, guys, in 8 minutes, we should see this trail on the right. And that's what we're looking for. And now in that span of time, I've identified a trail that I'm on, how fast I'm going, how long it should take to get somewhere. I've talked about the target we're aiming for, which is a trail on the right. And I've told the whole team like what I'm thinking in my brain. And this allows everybody to kind of be on the same page as me when we're walking and when we're going through it, such that, there's 4 sets of eyes on watches on the trail, et cetera, going through things. You can get really aggressive with how you split this up. When we did Untamed New England a few years ago, Cliff, I don't even remember, but on the first leg, we ended up splitting up like, okay, somebody keep track of time. And just that's your job for this first nav leg. Somebody keep track of looking at that tree, like that's way out there, and making sure that we stick to it. Because the trail was really, well, we weren't going on a trail. We were bushwhacking for about 20 miles, but it was useful to give people kind of specialized navigation roles, I would say, while we were going through the woods. It just helps to keep the team really mentally engaged, because when you're not on the maps, it can be hard to know what you're looking for.
That's a really important point, actually, as a non-navigator, because if I don't have a job, then I start talking with anyone around me, and that can then seep into the navigator's head. And I was talking with Matt Hayes. We went for a ride today, and he was like, yeah, when on night 3 of Expedition Oregon, I like completely got engrossed in a conversation about kids or politics or something, and completely forgot I was navigating. And then was like, I have no idea where we are. And then we got really lucky because a team walked by them in the middle of the night, and they were able to just like follow them to a known point. But that can backfire on the navigator if you haven't given me a job, then I start distracting you accidentally.
But Cliff, I always will enjoy your color commentary. It keeps me sane as well. So this is good. So time for navigation, it's really, yeah, like I said, it's a substitute for pace for me. It's just knowing how far I'm going in a given set of time so that I can relate it to the map and say I should go for X number of minutes before I get somewhere. The mistake here that caused me to use this when I first started racing is that I would constantly look at the map every 2 minutes, because your brain goes, oh my gosh, I need to make sure that I am where I think I am and how far I think I've gone. And so every 2 minutes I'd be looking at a map. And it's much better when you just say, no, we should be going in this direction for 5 minutes. And then, at 4 minutes in, you can start to pull out your map and get prepped for the next move. And again, this will vary, per discipline. So, and we talked about water navigation and how timing yourself on the water is important, because that gives you a sense of how fast the current's moving when, you likely might not be able to see a current at all. So it may not think you're moving that fast. And on a bike, if you have a cyclometer, this is easy. You barely have to keep track of time because you have a device that's going to tell you exactly how far you've gone. So on a bike, I don't think about time too much.
You do have to remember to reset it, though, at a known point. We have 3, really everyone on your team should have one, but we'll have one that's total mileage for the whole race. We'll have another person resetting at every TA, and we'll have a third person resetting at every known point or checkpoint, so that we've got lots of different distances as data points. So,
yep. There's a couple more points that I'll make about time and tempo here. So your tempo is going to change. Night is the big one. Night, you're going to go 60% as fast as you would during the day, regardless of if it's like the start of a race and you feel fresh or not. Night just slows everyone down. So it's useful to know that and take it into account, even if you don't feel like you're going slower. And the other thing to note, this goes to like tempo and targets. If you're striking a bearing and you're going across the side of a mountain, know how it's going to shift how you walk if you're going for a long distance. Meaning, like if the mountain slopes down to your right, naturally people tend to start falling downhill as they walk. Falling just meaning like leaning in that direction, even if you're think you're moving straight. And so it's useful to keep it in your mind of like, no, I need to like fight the urge of gravity here to pull me downhill and make sure I'm keeping my bearings straight on. This is why targets are so important. If you have like a tree that you can, seek out 200 yards in the distance and angle for that, and then say, when I get to that, I'll take another bearing and go another 200 yards out from there. That to me is a very useful navigation technique to prevent, sliding around terrain, basically. On a more macro level, time is important when it comes to making decisions around what portions of a course to skip. So we tend to have like a lot of team conversations as we're going through a race, around, okay, we've been racing for 4 hours. It's taken us this long to get this far. In the back of my brain, I might be going, it really doesn't make sense to get these other checkpoints because like we have to get to the finish line, or we're going to get penalized, or we have to get to this next transition area, we're going to get penalized. So I'm always thinking at a macro level of like, how much time have we really spent in this area, and how reasonable is it for us to get to, the next true cutoff, with a safe margin of error. And so from a more macro level, that's something that you want to keep in mind, as you're navigating as well, so that you don't get caught going, yes, I've hit every single checkpoint in the race. And then you go, oh no, I'm going to make it to the next TA an hour past due, because then it doesn't really matter that you hit every checkpoint to that point. So that's a super useful thing. So how far can you follow a bearing in heavy woods with no discernible topography? Extremely far. And what I mean by this is, you'll take a bearing, and the woods can be super dense. And Cliff, I'm looking at you because this question describes the first leg of Untamed New England 2018. It was a 20-mile trek through woods that you could barely see more than 30 or 40 yards ahead of you. It was such thick brush, and you had to pop out the other side. There are teams that were stuck on this leg of the course for days. The first leg of the course for days. The trick when you're doing it in really heavy woods is it's kind of mindless repetition. It's grabbing a bearing, looking as far out as you can, that 30 to 40 yards, if that's all you got, finding a unique feature, which is usually just a tree, and then gluing your eyes to it and going right for that. And then once you hit it, you pull out your compass, you do it again, you follow that bearing again, and you keep going, until you get to whatever your next movement point is. So that is, like, in my opinion, the best way of sticking to a bearing. It's not looking at your compass constantly. It's looking at your compass, grabbing something in the distance, and just bunny hopping it over and over and over again. And that's what we did for, I don't know, 8 hours, 9 hours or so, Cliff. And we got through, one of the top teams in Untamed. So I'd say that's the best way to do it. Does that answer your question, Bert? Is there a follow-up there? You can just type, because I don't know if people
Yeah,
can
I'm
talk.
going to go ahead and talk. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
So, my father-in-law, who's an old like ranger soil scientist, is always, trying to convince me to just, practice with the compass, shoot a bearing, use a mirrored compass, all of that kind of thing. And I find in races, it's really hard to, the good teams, first of all, don't seem to do that very much. They're really looking at the map and looking for terrain more than following a compass bearing. But I even though I try to practice the technique that you were describing, I find that after in heavy woods, more than a couple of maybe 300, meters, it becomes pretty tough, because each time you sight, you have an error, a small error, right? And those errors can add up the more you do it.
Yeah.
That's why.
So I think I can answer, maybe, thanks for the extra color. So rarely am I ever using the like pure bearing technique to get through a race. I cite Untamed as like one of the few times when it was a long trek where we had to just do that. Much more frequently on any course, you talked about seeing other teams looking at maps. I'm almost always looking for something that isn't a pure bearing and is some, like, either a trail or a stream or a riverbed or something where I know roughly where I'm going to pop out to get me to roughly the next spot that I need to go to. So, like, I'll look at a map and say, okay, if I go like, 80-ish degrees and I run really quick through these woods, I should hit some sort of stream bed. And then if I go, 120-ish degrees from there, I should hit, south of a trail junction. So then I can go to the trail. Like that's more what I'm doing. And so even if I waver, like without really taking a bearing there, I know what my backstop is. And that's really important, right? Is to have some sort of when I talk about targets, having something that you're actively looking at while you're navigating. And almost more importantly, something that you can say, if I hit this, I know that I've either gone too far or I'm really right on the target that I should be. So either a trail or a stream bed. Rock walls are awesome on maps. They're usually printed out pretty well, and those are good to track. So yeah, I agree. It's not always great to follow a straight bearing. When you look at the more experienced teams, they're using maps to figure out what those key targets are and to get close-ish to them some way or another. All right, let me read out this next question here. So one of the skills our team is working on is reconciling smaller topographic features on the ground with the map and vice versa. Yeah, so this is well, so to be clear, Kate, are you talking about topographic features here, like down to like orienteering style maps, meaning like there is a small depression in the ground? Or are you talking about features that you're trying to discern, like, like hilltops or things like that?
Oh.
I can hear you. You're good.
Hi.
Hi.
It's actually both of us.
Kate and Jason.
Yeah.
We're talking about like, knolls or mounds that you might see. And sometimes you'll see a knoll on the map that should be on the ground and it looks larger or smaller than you expect. More often than not, the mistake that we often make is we'll see some feature on the ground, like a knoll, and we'll be looking at the map and we know exactly where we are, but we just don't see that when we think, given the scale of the map, we should. So I don't know if it's just that maps don't always have every little bump, even when they're at the scale they should be, or I don't know if you have any tips on that.
Yeah, so I don't have any tips specific to like finding the knoll, but I'll say I struggle at times as well with the like, the clue might say, this hint is, or this CP is on a knoll, and the map makes it kind of apparent, but I'm like, I have no idea if this is going to show up or not, right? What I tend to do, this goes back to time. Like if I know the time that my team is moving through the woods, and I know that I'm starting to get close to what the thing is on the map that we're looking for, what Cliff and I and Strong Machine will do is we'll start to fan out as a foursome, and we won't like walk in a line anymore, and we'll just start to fan out and keep like 10 to 20 yards between each other and start moving forward, because we know at that point that like we should see relatively soon what we're going to run into. And it's especially when there's like, it's kind of hilly terrain and it's hard to see over everything. Fanning out is the best solution to this that I've found. Just getting more eyes over a broader area of land and not getting too stuck in one spot saying like, this is where the CP should be. But pushing through and keeping eyes all over the place, and having a backstop, meaning if you have some feature that if you've gone too far, that you've gone too far, be it a stream bed or something like that. So I'd say rarely are we looking for the knoll. What I really tend to have us look for is we're getting close, fan out, and it should be around here. And if we hit a stream, we've gone too far. And for 90% of the checkpoints, I'm able to break it down into that type of a scenario. There are occasions where it can get really tricky and you're looking for the knoll. There's one race that I have in mind that Cliff, you've probably blocked out of your memory. Naira 2016-ish, in the middle of the night. There was a literal knoll that every team got stuck on, that a CP was like buried 2 feet underground, and it was the worst checkpoint I've ever seen in adventure racing. I don't know how you find that. I don't have a good solution. I think Cliff was ready to kill someone at the end of that race.
Yep.
But that's what I do. Cliff, do you have any tips on when you're trying to navigate the map like that?
A couple, and they're not going to be satisfying. The first one is being a race director now, after racing for a number of years, the quality of maps that we can get our hands on vary greatly in terms of quality and in terms of when they were last updated. And so it could be the map's fault. It could be the fact that the map was made in 1968 and land has changed. Or it could be the race director's fault of putting a checkpoint on a knoll that doesn't exist in real life, or making you go over a knoll that doesn't exist on the map. And so that's not the satisfying answer, but that's really what you're talking about is the key to doing well in at that high level in adventure racing. And that's where you see teams, make 5-10 minute up to an hour time differences. And that's really why at the top level, adventure races are won and lost on foot. And a lot of it comes down to experience and that sixth sense of like, we got this, or it's a little further, or, fanning out and communicating amongst the team, trying to use as much data as you can by spreading your team out a little bit and communicating, what do you see over there? What do you see over there? And then always in the back of your head, especially at night, realizing that you probably haven't gone far enough. I don't know how many times we stopped 20 yards from the checkpoint and had a 15-minute conversation and then walked 20 yards and it's right there. And then the other thing is not getting too lost when you do miss it. And like that backstop is huge, because you could say, oh, we haven't gone far enough. And this has only happened once in, every 20 tries. And you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. It's over the next hill, it's over the next knoll. And then you're like, where are we? And there's no checkpoint. And then there's no connection with the map. So it's very hard to relocate and try again. But you'll see in a lot of races, teams attacking 2, 3, 5 times on a checkpoint because it's tough. Those are the more advanced foot points. And it's a very delicate balance as a race director, finding points that are going to challenge the top teams without being total crapshoots. You want it to be skill-based. So what we try and do as race directors, and not all race directors have the same modus operandi, is place them on known features that are tough to get to or have multiple route options, so that you'll see the checkpoint when you get there. And we put reflector tape on it, which Naira didn't do in that race, which made it additionally difficult. And we don't want it to be that you navigated successfully to the point and you can't find it. If you've navigated successfully there, we want you to find it. But we want it to be either, well, there's 3 different ways to get there. What's the fastest way? Or this is a little tricky. This could throw off your bearing, but once you're there, we want you to be there. So again, there's quality of race, there's quality of map, and then there's just luck of the draw. If you're attacking, you may want to, on Rogaine sections where you can get points in any order, look at how it's easier to attack from a certain direction. I think Tom talked about that in the last clinic we had, of saying, well, this route, it's straight uphill. That one goes up and down 3 knolls and you have to hit the 4th re-entrant on your left. So looking at attacking and taking on routes in a certain order so that you find easier attack points is another way to handle that. But that said, there's really no golden answer to your question of how do you deal with smaller topographic features that may or may not be on the map and navigating through them.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I've had some nightmare checkpoints with you, Cliff, out on there. They're all coming back to me now. Most of them are around well hidden ones like that.
Tuck them away in your head. Don't open that box.
No. Well, a lot of this is due to the orienteering races that I do as well, which are like those maps are down to like micro terrain settings, like the rock that you see over a hill.
Too easy. It's too easy.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I've touched base here on my 4 T's, and I'll just go back on it. These are the things that I always think about. It's just what timing, what am I looking for, how long I've been on the course, tempo, how am I moving, how am I feeling, how's the team feeling, how am I changing my pace, targets, what am I looking for, and talking, just telling the team this is what I'm thinking across these these things, and that makes up my 4 T's of navigation that I like to stick by. And that works really well. So I have a couple other random tips that I just put in here that I've kind of picked up, that I've written down my own kind of notes over the years. So the first actually is goes to what Cliff just said, which is that maps are merely representations of reality. And it's important to remember that a map is not locked in stone. It's there to just help to guide you to where the checkpoint may be. So that rock wall that you don't see, or the, that ended 50 yards, prior, because the map was made in 1950. Remember, it's just a representation of reality. Use it as one of the tools in your tool chest and not as gospel. And this is why a lot of races will give you multiple maps covering a specific part of the course, because one of them might not suffice to showcase where the checkpoints actually are. Roads are king. When I first started racing, I wanted to bushwhack everything. And occasionally, to give Cliff a heart attack, I will still tell him that I want to bushwhack everything. If you can stick to roads, not only do you know where you are, you're going to move faster. And it's way better than trying to bushwhack, to try to save a half a mile, as opposed to, running a mile. I'd argue that I'd almost take double the distance on something that I know on easy terrain than trying to whack through woods that might be a total pain in the ass. Same goes with trails. Trails are a close second to roads. Stick with what you know. Bushwhack only if you have to, or only if it's a extremely clear advantage to do so. Otherwise, stick to roads and trails. Always have some sort of backstop that, if you can, for what you're, where you're going and what says I have gone too far, because that's the most frequent nav mistake that you're going to make. So be that a four-way intersection that you need to turn around at, a stream, some sort of trail junction, have some or a time. I've gone 30 minutes and I should have gone 20. Have something that is your backstop where you look at the team and say, we've gone too far, we have to turn around and go from there. This prevents you from just pushing too far away from where you're supposed to be. Controversial, and Tom talked about this too. I really like to cut my maps when I get them, and I don't cut them up and like throw pieces away. But on a lot of races, you might get like a giant map, right? That's like a few feet by a few feet, and it's like a big biking leg. Some teams like to fold them up and put them in their map bags. I actually like to cut them and then place them in the order by which I'll be traversing that terrain, so that in my map bag, I can really easily flip between them and save some time going through it. Personal thing, I wouldn't recommend everybody does it, but I'm just throwing it out there. I like cutting my maps. I think it helps me to flip through things a little bit faster. If you do this, don't ever throw a piece of a map away, because you don't know if it's going to be important later on. If the race allows it, get a second set of maps. I've been on a few races that allow this, and it's amazing because you can give them to another navigator, or if you destroy them somehow, you have a second pair. Something important here around like map destruction, because I've been in races where maps have been destroyed and you weren't allowed second copies of them. Most races will now let you, you can bring a cell phone with you, or people have, portable cameras. I've seen teams use like digital cameras, and they'll take a picture of their maps before they get started, so that if a map gets wrecked halfway through, they have something that they can look at later on, as opposed to, dropping out of the race or having to go to find another team to figure out where they're going. So you'll never really do this on a short race, but for a longer race, like 36 hours or more, maybe 24 hours or more, like this has saved us in the past, being able to look at something when a map gets shredded.
I heard a story about, in an expedition race, they put the maps in the wrong TA box, and they literally nabbed an entire like 20-hour bike leg using their digital camera.
Yeah, this was that was Yoga Slackers, which is now a different team. I don't remember what they're called, but yes, no, that was. Yeah, it's
crazy.
It's crazy. So Cliff had also mentioned that Kate and I like to switch off navigating sections. I think it's really important to have another backup navigator, or not even backup navigator, but like another navigator on the team, and you've predefined who is going to take certain sections of the race. Especially on longer races, it gives your brain a chance to kind of unwind and turn off, and gets other people a little more engaged with the course that you're running. And if you end up getting lost, it also gives you like a known navigator on the team to talk to about what's going on. But I think it's really important when you're doing the dueling navigator scenario, which on our team we had to do quite often, because I think we have 4 navigators on our team. talk about what your strategy is in advance of who's going to be leading each section. So you're not competing on the course, which is just a recipe for disaster in terms of like who is going to be running the maps and who's going to be making the decisions around what to do. Speaking of decisions, I always make sure to have somebody that isn't a navigator the final say of this is what we're going to do if no one can make a decision. And it shouldn't be a nav. Usually ends up being Cliff, where like if we're this lost and we've talked for 5 to 10 minutes and we're so out of it, there is always one person you have that is the like, this is what we're doing, so that you're not bickering about it out on the course. I think a lot of teams can get bogged down trying to figure out like who's the decider when you're out there, and laying out those clear course expectations in advance of who has certain roles is really important. This is not specific to navigating. I think we could have a whole nother talk on roles on the team and what to do when you're out there. But I think it's really important to have someone who is, the decider when it comes to this, usually the team captain.
And 85% of the time, that decision is, I'm really sorry, guys, but we have to reset. It's the toughest decision to make because you've committed like an hour trying to get this checkpoint. And usually that decision that I'm making is we have to bail on this, or we have to go back to a known point. And, I remember Kate and Rick being like, but it's right there. We know it's right there. It's like, guys, we've been at this an hour. It's not right there. We think it's there, but it's not. We need to restart. And it's a good position to be like a little removed, because you can look at it with a little bit more of a 360-degree perspective. You're not locked into the map, so you can just feel like we are way off course here. And it's a tough role to play, because the nav is going to plead like, I think I got it. If we just, no, sorry, we got to bail. And it's a stinker position to be in, but it's important to cut your losses sometimes.
Yeah. And that's pretty much it. Those are kind of my trips. So I talked about my tools, 4 T's, a bunch of random tips. So let's see. Being new to AR, what is your opinion of the maps and CP plotting at C2C? Cliff, do you want to take that one? I actually have not seen the maps for C2C.
C2C 2021. So this year, I'm not familiar with the fact that there was plotting. Aren't those maps pre-plotted? Or are you talking about where the CPs were plotted? Plotting typically means in AR, like you're getting coordinates and plotting them on the map yourself. Tom, I don't know if you want to address that. Maybe I need more details on your question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so being new to it, just not knowing how it was laid out, like is it where things were at? A lot of times you weren't finding things where they were marked, twisty tree in marsh. And
the clues.
Like is that typical? I mean, I've signed up for like 6 more, and I'm just trying to figure out how.
No, that's there. So Florida is unique topographically because it's flat as a pancake. Hearing from Glenn and Kit and Tom, who were our navigators for the last 2 years at C2C, the clues are all tree or like discrete pine, like useless clues. And the nav is all taking a bearing off a known point and just finding the point along that bearing. That is not the way our races will be. That's not the way. I don't know if you're based in somewhere flat, it'll probably be more like that in flat areas, but most of New England and Mid-Atlantic, there'll be known topographical features that you're steering towards.
I'm in Arizona, so you can nav without a compass.
Yeah.
Pick a river, a lake, a mountain, a ravine, and you're, navving that way.
Yeah, I would say 90% of the nav you're going to be doing is going to be towards hilltop or reentrant or something more distinct. The races out there, the ones I've done, have never been, off needing to, just shoot a bearing and walk for 800 meters. It's been very topo heavy navigation. There have been like some distinct sections in races we've done where it's like there's a 12-point section and you get to 1 point and it's like the next point is 80 meters that way. And those are usually in shorter races. And it's just to test your compass skills. But it's one section of a race. Always my least favorite section, especially when I was navigating. But some navigators love it because it just tests their right brain skills of like picking a direction and following it. Where I'm like very much an English major on things and want to color between the lines. So C2C is very, in my experience, was unique in the way it does its mapping, but I think that is a result of the fact that there really isn't much to put a checkpoint on other than like edge of swamp or like, Palmetto Grove, I guess. But I think that's part of how they make it a little harder on the foot to, get you to somewhere that's off trail that really, where there's no like even little dimples of height difference there. I hope that helps.
Cool.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Kate asked, wants to know more about my method for marking maps. Do different team members take different jobs, and do you have a routine? So for marking maps, for me, it's pretty solo based. If there's another navigator with me, like Kate, she'll usually like look at what I'm doing, but usually my brain is kind of working really rapidly with the map that I have in front of me, such that like input is hard, and I'm usually just saying like this seems the fastest, and Kate will just go quickly like yes or no, or vice versa if she's marking the maps. The method for marking the maps in every race that I have is I'll have like 6 different colored Sharpie markers, and for each given leg of the race, I'll use a different color Sharpie to just kind of say like this is the expected route that I'm looking at taking. And I make it the expected route, essentially, not like here all the bailout ways and here's all this other stuff. It's essentially like given how I know how quickly we can move, this is how fast I think we can move between these checkpoints. On a point-to-point race, this is easier to do because usually there's, as Cliff has said before, there's a known optimal path to get between 2 different points. And when if you can take that time at the start of a race to take an extra 20 seconds to look at a map between 2 points and say, yes, this little road here is definitely going to make a difference. It makes it's super useful. It'll save you time later on. Where it gets trickier, and this is in some strong machine races too, is where it's a free for all in a section where you might have 10 points, get as many as you want before you move on. This becomes much more of like a puzzle in your brain, of like, well, what is, kind of the optimal route here? Because you can flip back and forth on it a number of different times. And what I'll do is try not to get hung up on what is the optimal route, like, in those sections. And I'll just kind of say like, look, I think this is the best way to get through it. But when we get there, it probably will make a little more sense as to what we need to do when we can see what the terrain looks like in this area. So, back it all off, I'm really marking in different colors for each leg, optimal route with colored Sharpie. I mentioned I also have like a pen that I'll mark next to it, and I'll mark a distance along those routes as well, like distance between trails, between roads. I'll frequently put like a time that I know we need to get to each TA. And I'll also, most importantly, actually, I will write the clues from the clue sheet on the map. That way it's right next to the CP. I'm looking at the map, the clue's right there. There's also another person that has a clue sheet, but this gives me a basis for everything, because the clues are frequently terrain based, right? Like you're looking for the gnarled, the swirly tree, or you're looking for a creek bed. Or re-entrant, right? Sometimes you're going to get clues that are like, the cemetery, but like it helps. The clues absolutely help your navigation. So I like to write it on the map. And then in the longer races, this goes to the second question I'll answer in a second. In the longer races, I'll take the time to use my scale master to basically draw distances out a little more accurately to let me know, like, okay, this map scale is insane. This much difference in what I say could be 5 to 10 miles. And so using my scale master is super useful on a long windy road to say, okay, it's supposed to be 27.4 miles along this. I'll usually only use that scale master on an expedition race. I almost never have used it in anything shorter than 48 hours. It's always longer than that. Usually 48 hours and less, I can look at the map and just do it all on my own. How precisely do I measure distance? And Kate, if I didn't answer your question entirely, you have more, just type it in here or interrupt me and I'll jump back in. I guess, sorry, to finish off that question, my routine is like the second I get maps, I'm on them, looking at them, trying to devise that distance. I'm trying to mark them all before the start bell goes off, but I will take extra time if needed to mark the map more. I find that that little amount of payoff makes a huge difference later on. So Bert, how precisely do I measure my distance when marking up a map? Not a ton. Like again, because I don't use a scale master on anything under 48 hours, I'm marking it to a degree that I can understand the timing implications, right? So I wouldn't look at like a bendy road and wing it and say like, oh, this might be, this is 10 miles when in reality it's like 6. Like that's a pretty far swing, but I'll usually try to get it plus or minus like 10 to 15% by eyeballing it. And I've read maps long enough that I can mostly kind of understand, like, I'll take my compass and lay it on the map, which has the grid lines, and that'll give you a distance of, between each of the grids. And then I can say, oh, this is roughly like 1.5 miles or, 1.5K. And so I'll mark that on the map so I don't have to think about it later on, but it's certainly not accurate. It's accurate enough for me to understand like what I'm going through. It's the distances are especially relevant on windy trails, not on straightaways. On a straightaway, it's kind of easy to look at and be like, oh yeah, I'm going for 4 miles. Like I can do this easily. It's when you have the trails that kind of go like this, and then I'm looking at it earlier in the race and I'm like, okay, that kind of looks like maybe it doubles back a few times, and getting just taking a closer look at it when my brain is fresh and saying, okay, this is probably about 2K or 3K instead of 10K or a half a K. That's where it becomes super useful for me. So I think those are pretty much all the tricks that I do when it comes to marking up distances on a map. Yeah.
Cool. We're past an hour here, so I'll wrap things up unless anyone has any last questions. Feel free to jump in if you do.
And even if you don't want to jump in now, I have a note here that I didn't talk about. When I first started adventure racing, I did not have a group like this to talk to. And I always looked at the teams that were awesome and the navigators that I looked up to then, who I'm friends with now. But I always looked at them and I was like, man, I can't ask them stupid questions like, how do I use the compass to do this and that? I wish this group existed when I started adventure racing. Like, hit me up on Facebook or wherever if you have questions, or Glenn or Tom. Like, adventure racing is the nicest group of people on the planet that all just want to help everybody else get better. So like, leverage these relationships and these connections aggressively, because everybody just wants to see everybody get better at this sport.
Cool. I talked with Matt, who raced at the highest level of adventure racing globally for a number of years, and he just moved to Maine today, and he said he would be interested in doing like a nav level 3, which I don't even know. That's like Sigma 8 or whatever, black belt. Definitely outside of my realm of comprehension, but I think that could be fun for all of us to listen to. So I'll try and convince him to do that on a coming Sunday. I think we'll have time before Expedition Oregon to do one more of these. So try and do that in later this month or early May. And then we start getting into the meat of the season, and we'll see. These might drop off through the summer as we get busier. But again, if anyone has any, I've been taking a list of suggested topics. If anyone has any other interests in learning more about certain things, let us know. And other than that, thanks so much for joining us and your good questions. And always reach out to us on the Adventure Racing, or Strong Machine Adventure Racing Facebook page. The Strong Machine AR Club is meant to be a hub for this kind of conversation. And if you're looking for a wider, global discussion, the Adventure Racing discussion group is great. If you haven't signed up for your races this summer, they're all up there now on USARA's calendar. So definitely head to usara.com and start signing up for some. I know they're filling up a little bit more and earlier than usual with the influx of new racers, so which is great to see. But snag a spot while you can. And Rick, thanks so much for this hour. Believe it or not, I still managed to learn from you. Despite the many hours I spent following you through the woods. And and thanks to everyone. And we'll see you soon. Happy racing if you're starting to get out racing. So thanks, everyone. Bye.
See y'all out there. Bye.